Chapter 27 of The Expedition of the Donner Party and Its Tragic Fate. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Donna Stewart, Seattle, Washington. The Expedition of the Donner Party and Its Tragic Fate by Eliza P. Donner Houghton, Chapter 27. Captain Xxvii, Wedding Festivities, The Masterpiece of Grandma's Youth, Señora Vallejo, Jakey's Return, His Death, a Cherokee Indian who had stood by my father's grave. Captain Xxvii spent much time in Sonoma after Company H was disbanded, and observing ones remarked that the attraction was Miss Fanny Vallejo. Yet not until 1851 did the General consent to part with his firstborn daughter. Weeks before the marriage, friends began arriving at the bride's home, and large orders came to Grandma for dairy supplies. She anticipated the coming event with interest and pleasure, because the prolonged and brilliant festivities would afford her an opportunity to display her fancy and talent in butter modeling. For the work she did not charge, but simply weighed the butter for the designs and put it into crocks standing in cold water in the adobe stone house where, in the evenings after candlelight, we three gathered. Her implements were a circular hardwood board, a paddle, a set of small, well-pointed sticks, a thin-bladed knife, and squares of white muslin in various degrees of fineness. She talked and modeled, and we, listening, watched the fascinating process. Saw her take the plastic substance, fashion a duck with ducklings on a pond, a lamb curled up asleep, and a couched lion with shaggy head resting upon his forepaws. We watched her press beads of proper size and color into the eye sockets, skillfully finish the base upon which each figure lay, then twist a lump of butter into a square of fine muslin and deftly squeeze until it crinkled through the meshes in the form of fleece for the lamb's coat. Then use a different mesh to produce the strands for the lion's mane and the tuft for the end of his tail. In exuberant delight we exclaimed, "Oh, Grandma, how did you learn to make such wonderful things?" "I did not learn. It is a gift," she replied. Then she spoke of her modeling in childhood and her subsequent masterpiece, which had won the commendation of Napoleon and Empress Josephine. At that auspicious time she was but 18 years of age, and second cook in the principal tavern of Neuchâtel, Switzerland. Georgia and I sat entranced as, with animated words and gestures, she pictured the appearance of the buglers and heralds who came weeks in advance to announce the date on which Emperor and Empress would arrive in that town and dine at the tavern. Then the excitement and enthusiastic preparations which followed. She described the consultations between Herr Wirth and Frau Wirthin and their maids, and how finally Marie's butterpiece for the christening feast of the child of the Herr Graf was remembered, and she, the lowly second cook, was told that a corner in the cellar would be set apart for her especial use, and that she should have her evenings to devote to the work, and 3 Groschen (7½ cents) added to her week's wages if she would produce a fitting centerpiece for the Emperor's table. 5 consecutive nights she designed and modeled until the watchman's midnight cry drove her from work, and at 3 o'clock in the morning of the 6th day she finished. And what a centerpiece it was! It required the careful handling of no less than 3 persons to get it in place on the table, where the Emperor might see at a glance the groups of figures along the splendid highway, which was spanned by arches and terminated with a magnificently wrought gateway surmounted by His Majesty's coat of arms. We scarcely winked as we listened to the rest of the happenings on that memorable day. She recounted how she had dropped everything at the sound of martial music, and from the tiny open space at the window caught glimpses of the passing pageant, of the royal coaches, of the maids of honor, of Josephine in gorgeous attire, of the snow-white poodle snuggled close in the Empress's arms. Then she told how she heard a heavy thud by the kitchen fire, which made her rush back, only to discover that the head cook had fallen to the floor in a faint. She gave the quick call which brought the Frau Wirthin to the scene of confusion, where, in mute agony, she looked from servant to servant, until, with hands clasped and eyes full of tears, she implored, "Marie, take the higher place for the day, and with God's help, make no mistake." Then she went on to say that while the dinner was being served, the Emperor admired the butter piece, and on hearing that it was the work of a young maidservant in the house, commanded that she be brought in to receive commendation of himself and the Empress. Again the Frau Wirthin rushed to the kitchen in great excitement, and, knowing that Marie's face was red from the heat of the fire, that she was nervous from added responsibilities, and not dressed for presentation, cried with quivering lips, "Ah, Marie, the butter piece is so grand it brings us into trouble. The great Emperor asks to see thee, and thou must come." She told how poor, red-faced, bewildered Marie dropped her ladle and stared at the speaker, then rolled down her sleeves while the Frau Wirthin tied her own best white apron around her waist, at the same time instructing her in the manner in which she must hold her dress at the sides between thumb and forefinger, and spread the skirt wide in making a low, reverential bow. But Marie was so upset that she realized only that her heart was beating like a trip hammer, and her form shaking like an aspen leaf, while being led before those august personages. Yet, after it was all over, she was informed that the Emperor and Empress had spoken kindly to her, and that she herself had made her bow and backed out of the room admirably for one in her position, and ought to feel that the great honor conferred upon her had covered with glory all the ills and embarrassments she had suffered. To impress us more fully with the importance of that event, Grandma had Georgia and me stand up on our cellar floor and learn to make that deferential bow, she by turns taking the parts of the Frau Wirthin, the Emperor, and the Empress. She now finished her modelling with a dainty centerpiece for the bride's table, and let me go with her when she carried it to the Vallejo mansion. It gave great satisfaction, and while the family and guests were admiring it, Signora Vallejo took me by the hand, saying in her own musical tongue, "Come, little daughter, and play while you wait." She led me to a room that had pictures on the walls, and left me surrounded by toys. But I could not play. My eyes wandered about until they became riveted on one corner of the room, where stood a child's crib which looked like gold. Its head and footboards were embellished with figures of angels, and a canopy of lace like a fleecy cloud hovered over them. The bed was white, but the pillows were covered with pink silk and encased in slips of linen lawn exquisite with rare needlework. I touched it before I left the room, wondering what little girl dreamed in that beautiful bed, and on the way home Grandma and I discussed all these things. The linen pillow slips were as fine as those Señorita Isabella Fitch showed me when she gave me the few highly prized lessons in simple drawn work, and her cousin Señorita Lise had taught me hemming. These young ladies were related to the Vallejos, and also lived in large houses facing the plaza, and were always kind to Georgia and me. In fact, some of my sweetest memories of Sonoma are associated with these 3 Spanish homes. Their people never asked unfeeling questions, nor repeated harrowing tales, and I did not learn until I was grown that they had been among the large contributors to the fund for the relief of our party. I have a faint recollection of listening to the chimes of the wedding bells, and later of hearing that Captain Xxvii had taken his bride away, but that is all, for about that time dear old Jakey returned to us in ill health, and our thoughts and care turned to him. He was so feeble and wasted that Grandma sent for the French physician who had recently come among us. Even he said that he feared that Jakey had stayed away too long. After months of treatment, the doctor shook his head, saying, "I have done my best with the medicines at hand. The only thing that remains to be tried is a tea steeped from the nettle root. That may give relief." As soon as we could get ready after the doctor uttered those words, Georgia and I, equipped with hoe, large knife, and basket, were on our way to the Sonoma River. We had a full 2 miles and a half to walk, but did not mind that, because we were going for something that might take Jakey's pains away. Georgia was to press down the nettle stems with a stick, while I cut them off and hoed up the roots. The plants towered luxuriantly above our heads, making the task extremely painful.